That's recording. Audacity is recording. Everything's go. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Actually, I'll start again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for tuning in to this first sort of webinar / podcast episode as a team. We've got a collective bunch of some really knowledgeable individuals who have come together to really share some of our experiences, our knowledge around, I guess, the world of business and life in general. On the team, we have got Carlos, we have got myself, Peter, we've got Ken, Chris, James and Farrah, and I'm sort of running through because I'll let them each individually introduce themselves. So the discussion focus for today will be a couple of interesting areas. One, we're going to talk about project management. So we're going to talk about how do you handle projects when things have changed in the landscape? How do you handle projects when clients decide to pause them on you and you've got to then sort of restructure things? Then we're going to talk about the interesting topic of should we or shouldn't we cut back on marketing spend? What an interesting topic. We've sort of been debating this back and forth internally, certainly ourselves and also with clients as well. And we've got our view and we'd like to present it to you and be interested to hear what you think. And lastly, we're going to talk about digital transformation. It's a buzzword that everyone's talking about, and I think it's a really, really relevant topic that we need to be addressing and discussing now. And it is something that if you're not familiar with, you've got to tune in and listen hard and listen carefully because it is the future. And it will help you not just ride through what we're going through now, it'll set a new direction for your business and set a new future for your business. Your competition is doing it, so you've got to do this as well. So before we kickstart, I'd like to pass the baton around to the team. Start with Carlos, general intro, and then we'll get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos. My main areas of expertise include, but are not limited to, marketing, international business, and advertising, as well as public relationships. So hopefully you will get some knowledge that you can apply to your own business. And yeah, that's about me.
Fantastic. Ken, I'll pass it to you.
Okay, yes, my name is Ken Kramme. A bit of a Yank accent here, but an Aussie citizen too. And my past is I was a partner for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and over 30 years I've dealt with large projects, both in waterfall, that is analysis, design, construction, etc., and for medium to small projects using Agile and Scrum. So I have certifications both in the waterfall techniques as a project management professional and a portfolio management professional, and also a couple of certifications as a Scrum Master. So that's me.
Fantastic. Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris. I have a long history in consulting, and over the last 30 years or so, I've also built a number of businesses on the back of the consulting to provide additional downstream services to clients. I guess my specialty is first and foremost marketing, but more recently I've been very heavily involved with change management, particularly as it relates to staff, your staff and your people. And that's basically where I'm at the moment, and that's tending to be quite a big issue right now because of COVID.
Definitely. Thanks, Chris. Thanks. And James and Farrah. Just your mics.
Yeah. My name is Farrah Macchiwala. I am a project manager by profession. Worked with some companies such as Citibank and Accenture, primarily in the financial space. So managing projects, not just local teams, but also remote teams. And as an independent business owner, we've had the opportunity to work with teams across the globe. So we have to be very mindful of how to make sure that projects are delivered despite all the challenges that you might face. So that is my passion. I would say we've also been in the consulting arena lately, mostly with small businesses, and it's been an interesting transformation.
Yeah, I'm James Ussery from the States, and my main thing is technology. We have used our company from a sales and marketing perspective, but we started out in development, software development, web development. So the last, I guess, 5 or 6 years has been for me all about DevOps, hosting systems, and supporting from a technological background, where I believe that businesses need to be looking at that because they don't generally do that. So yeah, I'm the back-end support guy for everybody.
Fantastic. Thanks, team. And lastly, Peter Spinda, my main specializations are strategy and digital transformation, particularly digital transformation encompassing all aspects of it. I guess the focus that I'd like to have is to combine offline with the online and say to people that you don't just go online purely and forget about offline, but also you can't operate offline anymore in a pure modality. You've also got to be online. So it's helping clients transition, developing the right strategies, and transforming organizations digitally so that they're growing forward and creating the future. So now, interestingly, talking about the future, we've got so many changes at the moment. This whole COVID has changed the entire landscape. And I think, you know, Ken and Farrah, both of you having come from a project management background, you would certainly have seen from experience how projects normally work from a fluidity point of view and normally work under normal circumstances. But we're in different times now, and we're seeing projects pausing. We're seeing project directions change because of changes in requirements. So what I want to do is just pass the baton to you, and would love to hear your thoughts on this, and especially what advice have you got for businesses that are going through this change process where they've either got to pause projects or clients have paused projects, or they've just got to address changes in the environment that affects the projects.
Right. Farrah, can I start out a little bit? Is that all right? Yes. What I'd like to do is use your framework, Peter, in which you said now is the time for looking at reflection, then strategizing and planning and actioning. And so if we focus first on reflection, I think you also talked about reflection and challenging, you know, the project being stopped. So I think it is an opportune time to look at 3 different parameters or dimensions on that. One is the project's link to the business. Let's reflect on whether that value has changed. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Reflect on the project approach. And increasingly, there's some wonderful alternatives for people to consider, whether it's the waterfall or the agile and scrum types of approach. And perhaps we can talk about that a little bit. And finally, reflecting on the project conduct. You've had a project that has stopped, and so now is an opportune time to say, to do some self-ratings on that. How good was the scope management? How good was the stakeholder and communication management? How good was the risk management? And how satisfied is the customer? So I think now is a good time for the reflection and challenging as to what the project's link is to the business, the project approach, and the actual project conduct. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, definitely does.
Absolutely, Ken. I completely agree with everything that you're saying. I think now is the time, rather than to go into hibernation mode, it's important to take a step back and be very reflective and analytical. A lot of times as a consultant, you know, you have to sort of play it out with your client. The client may want to just sort of clamp up, become very restrictive because of the uncertainty at these times. So it's important to help them kind of look through and beyond what's happening right now and look at the long-term goals. There may be projects that have got to be put on hold just because the justification doesn't line up with where the business needs to be after this period is over, or even during. There are other projects that may need to get fast-tracked. Like Peter says, we've had these clients that were planning things 6 months down the road. They've got to get fast-tracked because the environment has changed. But really, you have to be very mindful of why you're doing a project. And that goes back to the justification, all the risks, because at this time, there are more risks to be mindful of, and having mitigation plans. So completely agree with you there.
Yes, I think well said. I think on that first element, in terms of the project's link to the business, Some companies do that and organizations do it with a real formal mechanism in terms of as part of their portfolio criteria. But typically, even if it's small small companies, they do it in terms of, oftentimes in terms of business value, effort and cost of the project, and risk. And so some companies I've seen being reluctant because they say, oh, that's too difficult to add the business value to it or realize what the benefits are. But even if one takes it in terms of evaluating a project as, is it high value to the business? Is it medium, or has it become low over time? If one is able to quantify that in terms of the actual benefits, that's great, but you don't even need to go that far. You can just categorize it into the high, medium, low. Similarly, with the effort and cost, one can evaluate it in terms of high, medium, and low. And sometimes it might startle us that maybe things have changed, but when one does that reevaluation, it can result in a different prioritization within that portfolio. And finally, the thing that is oftentimes neglected or not paid as much attention to is the risk, which again can be the financial risk, the technical risk, the customer changing risk, et cetera. So, and it's probably worth a whole separate webinar just on risk and that risk mapping in terms of the severity and the likelihood. But again, one can keep it even simple in terms of high, medium, and low in terms of that project. So, and oftentimes a good first step is saying, let's take a pause and look at what is that link to the business. What is the importance to the business in terms of business value, effort and cost, and risk.
Okay, so what you're saying, Ken, basically is that rather than just sort of off the cuff saying, okay, no, we don't know what's happening and this whole COVID thing, we're just going to pause. Rather than doing that, maybe the approach is almost like a matrix style analysis to say, okay, well, what are the risks? What are the components, high, medium, low, as you indicated? Could even use colors, you know, green, amber, red for high risk, and maybe use that to help ascertain the next move, whether it's a decision to continue or pause or go in a different direction. Does that sort of what you mean?
Yes, and whether you want to or it's timely to reshape the project. So if it was a project that was dealing, for example, one of my clients is an insurance company and was dealing with international students, and that is a project that can or should be perhaps put on hold. But there are other feeder-in projects that could help lay the foundation that then is able to allow that to leapfrog later. So yes, so the first thing is saying, how does that stand as within the priorities of the overall portfolio, and should we, what is its value, effort, and risk associated?
Farrah, there's something that just popped into my mind as Ken's talking, and he gave that example of that student project. We're going through a big project at the moment, the e-commerce project. And what's been interesting is that if you recall, there was a particular requirement that me personally was quite sort of pushing for. And what ended up happening in that case is that you ended up finding a different way of achieving what we wanted to achieve, but an absolute fraction of the price. And you've said, look, we're doing it this way. It'll work. And if we find that the value is there, then we can invest the money to build that function out properly. So what are your thoughts on that? Because it's interesting to see how sometimes there might be some lower hanging fruit type solutions to a problem. It's a bit of a band-aid solution, but it's a way of testing without having to spend all that money and then getting the confidence. And then
right, Peter. And it goes back to similar to what Ken mentioned, right? We have to evaluate the cost and value of what we're going to be developing and what we're going to be getting back. So there's definitely an ROI factor there. there are many ways to, to do something. And it could take you a long time to put in the perfect solution, but is that time now? Do we want to invest the time and the money now to get to the perfect solution? Or do we solve the immediate problem? It's going to be a stable solution, and that's very key. We cannot just put in a Band-Aid and keep our fingers crossed and hope that the Band-Aid holds. It's very important to look at what things could go wrong even in a short-term solution, because we want the value, but we don't want the headache. So it's very important to look at all the factors around it. Going back to risk mitigation, something that Ken brought up that I wanted to add to is especially around resources right now. People on your project team or even in your customer base may not be as available to help you out on your project. So that's definitely a risk that you want to plan for and have mitigation for and a contingency for. It's important that you have backup plans in place, because the last thing that you want is you're hoping everything goes well. The project gets derailed because you didn't plan for something as simple as resource availability. And that could be technical resources, that could be financial resources, or even human resources. So that's something to keep in mind.
And from the technical side, though, we have to think, when you're planning out a project and you get your developer to give you an estimate of hours, he's going to give you an estimate of hours from his point of view, which is the development side. And whether or not he's actively, counting the testing hours, we don't know. But that's where the project manager needs to come in and say, okay, look, here are the possible risks that go on. Contingency needs to be higher than what the developer has set. And we've seen so many times the developers think they can do things in 2 hours where it turns out to be 6 hours, and obviously expand that out exponentially with a larger project. And you have some trouble there. So we do require that contingency and that buffer for risk.
Yeah, I think as a project manager, it's important to ask the right questions. Ask the right questions about, even within a project, are these requirements really key right now? So even within a project, you could take a step back and reevaluate your priorities. The entire project may not need to be done at one go. You may want to break it up into parts. And Ken, I'll let you talk more about project management methodologies there, because you've had experience with several different methodologies. But I think it's important to look at what's key right now, even on a project by project basis. Does everything need to happen all at once? Do we phase it? But at the same time, don't skip steps, because people get tempted, even in a normal scenario, to sort of shortcut certain things, and that can really cost you in the long run. I've seen too many projects trying to rush through phases where a little bit more time for requirements gathering, for scope analysis, for just setting the expectations, that those steps get missed. And then later down the line, there's a big deviation in understanding in the stakeholders. And that's pretty common, in fact.
No, you've actually raised something really, really important at the moment in this current climate, which is that when the project needs to change direction, and it's almost like at the moment there's a feeling amongst some of the clients, certainly we're working with it, okay, it's got to be quick, it's got to be instant, we've got to go, 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 go. But in fact, as you pointed out, and James and Ken, you also alluded to this in terms of a risk point of view, the risk is so high if you rush too fast that you're going to make mistakes. So even when you need to move fast, you might be better off slowing down and going slow initially, and then ramping up once you've got the confidence built in. And that's certainly something that I've learned from working with James and Farrah on these various projects and seeing how they operate. And that's definitely critical. Ken, what advice would you give, Ken, to the standard sort of small to medium business who's not completing these large $10 million projects, but perhaps they're sort of working on the $50,000 to $200,000 projects out there? It might be a transformation project. It could even be a human systems project, for example. What pieces of advice would you give them in these sort of times?
Yeah, I guess, again, going back to your reflection phase, reflecting on the project approach is an important one. So as you mentioned, some of the big companies have big projects and they use them oftentimes a waterfall approach, just as like building a building. But many other smaller organizations have been using Agile and Scrum, and again, that probably deserves its own webinar. But Agile and Scrum basically is saying, let's deliver product and faster and get feedback from the customer, whether they like it. And let's break it up into, for example, 2-week segments, and then get the team working really well together. So that Agile Scrum type of model is a very interesting one, and many companies are at all levels are finding a lot of success with it. And some of them are using the terms of Agile and Scrum being like daily meetings, etc. And it's a simple framework, but what it requires is really being disciplined in terms of using it. So small companies could and should probably at this point, in terms of their reflection, again, do a self-rating of them. How well is that project approach working? Or is it timely to be able to relook at that, tighten up in terms of how the team is working? Do they understand their roles? Do they understand that oftentimes it's not emphasizing documentation, but instead emphasizing the bringing to the table on a daily and weekly basis what are the results of their efforts? And so reevaluating their project approach and whether that an Agile Scrum framework is appropriate or they need to do it better is probably a very timely sort of thing to do.
It's, the other thing I'd add in there, as you were talking, you mentioned just a little bit about the human side of things. And what's important to remember is that every project is managed by the human beings. And we all know that if we have the wrong people on the team, then that can make or break the actual project. The wrong people on the team can ruin the entire project. We can have the best plans in place, but they can cause problems. And that's where, things like, and Chris, you often talk about the things like KSA analysis and looking at skills matrices and understanding who you've got on the team. And that's where that plays a critical role, because if you've got the wrong people managing the project, there's a high chance that it's just not going to work as effectively.
Yeah.
And
sorry, Pete.
That's all right.
It is. It's quite intriguing to actually go into companies once you've done your KSAs and you do a little bit of stock standard behavioral science. You start to initially you're astounded by what you find. But I think I mentioned this morning in the webinar that I often find, a combination of left brain people managing right brain team managers. It's never going to work. You've got two distinct sorts of people. You've got 4 brain quadrants, and if you're trying to get somebody that's very, very detailed and left brain, that person is trying to manage creatives, for instance. It's like putting an accountant in charge of an advertising agency. The creative in an advertising agency is disastrous. So a lot of projects come undone that way. And it's been my experience. I've worked with very, very, very large corporates, global corporates. And it's been my experience that the processes that these people bring to bear, and Ken, mentioned scrums, I call it, work in progress, whatever you want to call it. Those meetings processes that you put together to sort of enable your team and to engage your team are really critical. And I find them just completely missing in Australia almost. In the SME market, as part of process and change management, I try and get team leaders to run those scrums every single morning, 5 or 10 minutes, get the team engaged, make sure it's all happening. And it's a very simple, basic process, but it's missing. And without it, you just don't get a functioning team. You arrive at the mountaintop and look around and you're on your own up there is what happens. And the other thing, when Ken was just then talking about risk, there is so much science available to us now. Game theory is a new thing, and people go, what's a game theorist? Well, a game theorist is effectively someone that thinks through projects as if they're chess games. They're largely used in the sort of martial and politico environment, where should I invest that should I send an army into, to run a coup in that country? Should I do this? Should I do that? And game theorists sit down and manage these projects out and say, if you do that, this will happen. If you do this, that will happen. And managing teams effectively, the tools and things that Ken's talking about are all available to us. But it comes down to your point, Pete, is that if people aren't engaged that are running these projects, then you really are struggling. It's all uphill from there. It's all about, for me, it's all about getting them engaged, and then the projects run forward. Yeah.
So, sorry.
I can give one quick example of a telecommunications company here in the Gold Coast, and a couple of months ago, I went in and did some initial interviews, and each of them, it was only a small back office team of about 10 people of sales and marketing and developers, et cetera. And basically they were saying that they felt like they were setting each other up for failure and for finger pointing when releasing a new product to the market. And through some of these engagements in terms of with daily scrums and having everybody speak up and identify blockers of what was getting in their way of getting things done, it really got them, as you were saying, Chris, engaged and working together. And they came away with a feeling of support with each other. And very interestingly, the kind of the nerdy data business analyst that never said anything, he came out with some of the fantastic contributions and suggestions. And so by tapping into some of these other ways of project management teamwork, you can really realize some wonderful synergies and outcomes that you would never have anticipated before. So the engagement of the team and their participation and working together is key.
Fantastic. And look, I agree 100%. We've got quite a few projects on at the moment, and and this is something we'll talk about later, but when it comes to digital transformation, at the heart of all successful transformation projects is really team synergy, because when we've got team synergy and people engaged and people are enabled to contribute, then we can have forward momentum. Now, obviously, all of that needs to be supported with the right methodology, whether it's waterfall, agile, or a conjunction of the two. I mean, that's sort of, I'm starting to see these confluence of projects. Even in construction, we're starting to see this movement away from a pure waterfall with a little bit of this agile methodology coming in, which is quite interesting to see how that's taking shape. Now, Farrah, you and I, we've got a couple of projects at the moment we're working quite closely on. And certainly one of the things that I've noticed in terms of the way that you operate is you keep really clean and detailed documentation. Why do you do that, and what's the benefit to keeping those documents and keeping the logs and keeping a record of what's happening?
On any project, usually the ones that I've got experience with, they range from mid to large scale projects. It's really important to keep track of all the moving parts. And as the project manager, you're sort of like the ringmaster, the ringleader. You've got to have your things in order. Otherwise, you cannot give guidance where guidance is needed. Especially today, we've talked about risks and resources and people working remotely with social distancing. It's important to be able to communicate on any project for sure. But especially now where people may not be sitting in the same office, you don't have that in-person synergy. You've got to be able to communicate remotely. So having documents available where people can see the expectations, the goals, and be able to work towards a common goal to deliver the project successfully in the timeline, within budget. So it's especially important to keep track of all the details so that everybody knows what they're responsible for. They're working towards the same requirements. They're working at the same pace. And everything comes together in the end. Without having that, you're going to see people going off in different directions. Their understanding is different. We see remote teams not only from, within a particular area, but across the globe. People are working with developers online that they've never worked with before. They're working with resources across the globe that may be on a different time zone. Information has got to be available in a way that it's understandable. And one thing that a project manager has to realize is every team member will digest the information in a different way. Some people are more visual than wordy, and we have to be able to sort of be inclusive. So make sure that people understand. So reiteration, did you understand what I said? What did you understand of what I've given you? Where are your questions? So again, it comes down to maybe a little bit of over communication, at least initially, to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then you can sort of adapt, adjust as needed.
Well, that's really good advice. And look, some of the viewers or listeners, if we're once we've got this on the podcast, might be wondering why did I ask that particular question? Because now we're really going down the path of it's more project management methodology. And the reason I asked that and wanted this answer is because of this. We've been in a number of situations over the years in the projects that we've worked in, and certainly I've seen, where we haven't done this process, where we haven't followed the rigor, what ends up happening is we end up burning more money and more time, and we get more frustrated and stressed. And this is a really, really important point, because right now we have got clients coming to us potentially, looking at pausing projects. We have got clients asking whether they shouldn't, what should they do? And what I say is that, yes, there is an answer of whether you should or shouldn't, but if you decide to do it, it is also really important that you do it the right way so that the project succeeds and the project saves you money, which is what we've got to do at the moment, rather than going this kerfuffle circle and you end up wasting money. So the poignant part of what Farrah was saying is that take the time and invest it in the right methodology and the right focus, exactly what Kim was saying as well, and you will get a better return. Now, it's important to understand as a business owner that when you do this, the initial cost might be a little bit more. Don't be scared of that, because the initial costs are outweighed with the return on investment as a result of a cleaner, clearer project where you don't have to be jumping up and down because of the craziness that's happening. It's a more controlled process. It's really important to understand. And the other message that I have for business owners that are considering projects and looking at what to do is the simple fact that this COVID situation will go, things are going to come back into normality. If you had started a project right now, or were thinking of starting a project, then in my mind, I'm already knowing that you would have the budget already put aside for that project. You certainly wouldn't start a project with the goal of somehow raising the money. Maybe some people do, but I certainly wouldn't advocate for that. So if you've already got the budget, and if you go through the risk exercise that we spoke about, that Ken just mentioned, that Farrah was talking about as well, and you come out of it and you see, okay, there's actually a lot of greens here. And if you're willing to take on the right project management methodology, and it might be that you engage a project manager, then you know what I'll say to you? Do it. Don't stop the project because of some COVID thing may or may not impact something. If you've already got it, got the money, and you've put the thought in place, and you can justify your reasonings logically, I personally don't see a reason why a project shouldn't move forward. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think similarly that now is a time to reflect and relook at your, one of the key documents within a project is the project charter. And oftentimes that lays out who are the real stakeholders, the mapping of what is their influence, and also informs what types of communication strategies and plans you need to have with those folks. So oftentimes it's not the technical issues that stop projects, it's really the change and people issues and the stakeholders. The clearer you are with that stakeholder mapping of who's important, how often do they need to be communicated with? Is that on a weekly basis? Is that on a bi-weekly basis? Is it monthly, et cetera? Then that helps to provide a foundation of good success, whether you're pausing it now and then picking up later, or whether you're explaining why this project has been halted. And oftentimes that communication of how it's been reshaped and redesigned is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you've done good risk analysis, and you should be able to make a fairly good value judgment on what the landscape's going to look like at the other end when the project reaches fruition. And that's, I think, really critical. Somebody's already said it, but it's a critical thing. I mean, you know, we're assuming here that that the funding's in place and that the opportunity is there, and the only reason the project might have been halted or called question is because of COVID, which will go. It'll be gone, and provided that we have a full understanding of the landscape at the other end, then I agree with you, Peter. I see absolutely no other reason, to cease projects of that nature. In fact, I see lots of reason to push ahead with them.
Oh, exactly. And I mean, that's why we're seeing some of our projects, like James, we're working on one particular project at the moment, which is, taking a little bit of a different direction, and things are being brought forward. And that's fantastic, because the client will get a much better outcome much quicker. And the changes in terms of the COVID situation has actually forced the organization to accept change quicker. And the acceptance of change is part of project management, part of transformation. You can't do it without that.
That's part of business.
Say that again, sorry?
It's part of business. I mean, I don't understand how somebody can run a business and not expect change or accept it,
Right.
It's,
I think that's really important, because COVID is just the latest thing. I think if you don't have a business continuity plan, then you're going to be facing this over and over again. You're just not seeing the writing on the wall. I think it's really important to sort of take a step back and look at what should you be doing, not what you shouldn't be doing. What should you be doing to make sure that you're prepared for what's coming up, what's coming around the corner. And there may be projects that you decide that you want to take on, create the funding for. If you have the justification, get a project started to make sure that your business can continue, not just in the future, but what can you do right now to make sure you survive the storm?
Big time. But what's fascinating, though, out of all of this is, as we're sort of having this discussion, I'm thinking to myself, James, you're 100% right, but the number of times, and Chris, you and I have worked on several client engagements now where it just isn't there. Sometimes it's the analogy of I'll rent an office, I'll put up the open sign, and there's a lot more to it, isn't there? And so this is where what we're attempting to do with these sort of webinars and the communication pieces is to educate people to say, hey, listen, there's actually a little bit more to business than turning the closed sign to open. And it's really important to understand that as a business owner. And the whole thing around change is, the sad reality is the number of business owners that I've spoken to over the years who engage me because they just want to do something different, because things aren't working. And when you dig deep, the reality becomes quite clear that it's actually the person in front of the mirror that's causing the problem, because they're putting the block up, because the way they've been doing it for 15, 20, 10, 30 years is the way they want to continue doing it, when in fact things have changed and the acceptance hasn't been there from a change point of view. And of course things don't work there.
Yeah. Well, I've been banging away for near on 25 years about every single client I've ever had. Don't assume this is your business, because next year everything will be different. And I mean, Albert Einstein said a few fairly smart things, but one of the best things he ever said was, nothing happens until something moves. In other words, if nothing moves, nothing's going to change. And I'm stunned. My whole business, ethic really is to make sure a client's company is constantly for sale and is in perfectly good saleable condition. I'm not concerned whether he wants to sell or she wants to sell. I just want to see that business functioning at its absolute best. That means assuming that next year is going to be a lot different than this year. An acceptance of change and changing landscapes and technology, that's an extrapolating curve right now. And James just made a really interesting point that gets me into trouble in a lot of client meetings. I get angry. I go, why do you think you can start a business and just leave it sit there without reviewing constantly and strategizing and getting into the process of understanding what's happening in the world around you? Those widgets, they're last year's widgets. Can we consider what next year's widgets might look like, and then 5 years beyond that? So yeah, I get very, very upset and passionate about that. So I think
we'll do another webinar on that one at some point. But look, I think we've probably delved into this topic deep enough without getting overtly technical with project management. Just a final thing I'd like, if Ken and Farrah, so Ken, if you can just give us your final sort of minutes thoughts on this topic, would love to hear.
Yeah, my takeaways from this for for the audience is now is the time to take an opportunity to reflect on the project's business value, on the project approach, and you have choices there between Waterfall and Agile Scrum and others, and the project conduct. Are you pleased, and are your customers pleased with what they've seen of that project? And so the other takeaway is that stakeholder management is key, and especially with the project sponsor and people that you're working with. So with that, there's oftentimes an opportunity not to pause a project, but to remold it and to get a more motivated team out of it.
Fantastic. And what about yourself, Farrah? Last takeaway messages.
Just to add to what Ken said, I think communication is key on any project, especially now with people working remotely. Make sure that your team stays motivated, make sure they have the support they need to be able to work towards the goals of the project. You know, from a technical perspective, from the licensing, the tools that they need to be able to do this, have meetings as you need to, manage your risk. Sometimes all you need to do is bounce ideas off the person closest to you. And if you don't have somebody that can do that, talk to someone that could be, you know, a good fit as a project manager. And if you don't have that and you have the budget, get a project manager to help you, because to make a successful project, you need the right team. And without the right team, you're just going to land up burning your time and money.
Well said. Totally agree. Well, thank you, team, for that interesting discussion. I think you know, viewers or listeners are probably going to go away, have a good think about things in their business. And if you've got any questions at all, fire them away. Send our team an email or a message, depending on which platform you're watching this on or listening to from. And look, at the end of the day, we're a collaborative team of specialists. So if you do need any assistance or advice, guidance around project management or anything to do with, you know, projects within your organization, reach out. There's certainly experts on the team who can help you. Now, what's been interesting is that we've spoken about the element of risk, and through that, we also mentioned the financial component. We asked that question, well, should you or shouldn't you invest in a project? And that's a similar sort of question that we've been raising and discussing with our clients when it comes to sales and marketing. A lot of businesses at the moment are facing a decrease in appetite from a consumer point of view. Now, that decrease is either because it's forced. So if you're in hospitality, for example, you know, we can't at the moment in Australia visit a cafe, sit down, have a nice meal, have a chat to friends. We can't go to a bar, we can't go to entertainment venues. So it's a forced decrease in the consumption. And so with that in mind, we have had to have conversations with clients around, well, if you're a bar right now, should you continue spending money on sales and marketing, or should you completely pause those activities? And I'd have to say bars are one of those really extreme situations, or if you're an airline, for example, it's an extreme situation where your hands are really tied beyond your control. Now, on the other side, we have got organizations that haven't been as affected. And in fact, some of these companies are riding through this pretty well. So if I'm an online store at the moment, depending on what you're selling, and we've got one particular client at the moment whose business is just booming phenomenally because of the industry and what this company sells. If you're in that boat, we might even be having a different conversation, but they're also asking the question of, well, is the ride and is the wave that we're riding just sort of about to die down? And is the wave that we're riding a simple wave of consumption simply because psychologically people are fearful of missing out, and so therefore they're stockpiling? And so if you stockpile, a period will come where is it going to be crickets and it's going to be quiet because no one needs it because they've stockpiled? So should we then continue with marketing if everyone's already got their stockpile of products? Really interesting question. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on this and this whole sort of debate, discussion around sales marketing? Should we, shouldn't we? What are your thoughts? You've been, you know, doing this for many years more than I have, and you've certainly seen quite some interesting periods. Well, I think your microphone, Chris. Oh, there we go.
All right, you have me?
Yep.
Sorry, but yeah, it is interesting, and I have to go. I go through the same process as I mentioned in another webinar, where I've been through 5 or 6 major global upheavals, and somehow or other I've watched terrific companies come out of the other end because they've managed their sales and marketing tremendously well. And in every case, without exception, it is because they actually understand what their product is. Now, I know it sounds a little bit fundamental because, I sell, McDonald's is a terrific example. McDonald's had no idea I think in the late 90s, they had no idea what they were selling. There was a big push for health foods, and everybody was looking at, how many calories are in those rotten burgers. Surely there's nobody really wants to eat McDonald's burgers. But they decided to tell us they were healthy and that they were all coming from this fantastic organic farm in Texas or whatever. And it was completely wrong. And I was on an original panel and I said, just stop all this crap and sell the product, because you don't understand what your product is. People just want the best burger. They don't give a shit about whether it's got 1,400 calories or 14,000 calories. Just give them a burger that looks like that thing up on the wall instead of one that looks like it's been under a truck for the last 2 days, and that will do the job. And I was put off the case because I didn't know what I was talking about. It was a case of, no, we've got to get healthy. We've got to convince people that our burgers are healthy. I can go through a million examples like that, but the first and most critical point is when you really understand what you're selling, and a lot of SMEs don't, what your product is, what your service is, it's not that little round thing nobody wants. What is that thing used for? That's what your product is. So having understood what your product is, you can then start to understand whether it's going to fit into, the short term, the medium term, and the long term, purchasing decisions that people make. I mean, you've also got to divide it up into, discretionary spending versus essential spending. And clearly, essential spending is a lot easier to deal with. But the other fundamental is that when everybody else stops spending money, if you've got a good, sound product and you know what it is, when everybody else stops, that's when you pull out the big guns and start spending. That is when you win market share, without a doubt. Now, I don't want to sound cavalier about the situation that exists, but right now, all around the world, there'll be companies saying, we have the cash, we know what we're selling, we know how to reach our market, we have solid, sound sales techniques in place, our processes are good, let's double our sales and marketing budgets and pull market share. And your point, Pete, about you were just saying a moment ago about people who will stock up now, so they'll end up with a big stockpile. There will be, in those areas, there may well be a hiatus. I mean, I'm imagining that Kimberly-Clark and Bowater Scott and the big paper and toilet paper manufacturers are going to go through hell in about 4 or 5 months' time, because nobody's going to need any of this stuff except those sensible people like me. But this is the issue. I mean, if your product's right, and you have the budget, and it's exactly the same as Ken was talking about projects, don't pull back. Now is when you will pull large market share, when you are out there and visible. And it's almost, my old granny used to call it the squeaky hinge. The squeaky hinge is the hinge that gets the oil. So it works. I mean,
it's really interesting what you're saying. There's a couple of things I want to add in there. So first of all, just in terms of knowing your product and exactly what you said, I mean, I can bring this little device up and you could say, okay, what is it? It's a mobile phone, it makes calls. Okay, great. Now, for anyone that isn't familiar with the Steve Jobs 2007 Apple iPhone release, you've got to watch that. That is phenomenal. But even more phenomenal than that is the release of the iPod a couple of years before that. When Steve Jobs went onto the stage and he had his hand in his pocket and he started talking about this device, and he didn't talk about the number of gigabytes. He didn't talk about the hard drive, the features and functions and things like that. What he said was that this is a device that could hold, I think it's like 10,000 CDs in your pocket. And it was so powerful that there is marketing. You know what? Apple is an overpriced product. Sorry, but I have to say it. It is an overpriced product. But everybody's buying it because of the marketing, the success behind it. And yes, it is a good product. I do have to admit that. But the marketing behind that has been genius. Now, what's important in terms of what you're saying, Chris, from what I'm understanding, is that if you look around the world, you're going to see Coca-Cola everywhere from an advertising, marketing, branding point of view. Same thing with Apple. Apple is everywhere. You see them everywhere. But here's the thing. This is the question that I've got for you. Why do you think they need to do that if they're already well-known global brands? I mean, everyone knows Apple and everyone knows Coca-Cola, yet they still spend money on marketing. And the reason they do that is exactly what Chris says. It's because of the brand push. It's to keep the brand in the top of the consumer's mind so that when the consumer needs a product that fits their needs, and it happens to be a product that you sell, they'll think of your business first and foremost. Coke wants to do that with thirst. You know, when you get thirsty, have a cold Coke. Apple wants to do that with the music, with the smartphone. If you need a new phone, go to Apple. If you want to download music, go to Apple. Similar sort of a thing. So I agree with you 100%, Chris. I think, you know, now is definitely the time to be ramping things up. But don't ramp up for the sake of ramping up. Only ramp up if you know your product and if you know your customers. Now, then the other side of my mind goes, okay, but how do I know what's the right product?
So if I can add to that, besides only knowing your product, what you offer, and continue with the same example, McDonald's, we need to keep in mind the add value you provide to customers. Even if it's true that we know that the main contact or the main product from McDonald's are the burgers, there is a convenience side of things within that product. Normally, and I can guarantee you, and probably there's some research about it, 90% of the customers that go to McDonald's is because of the convenience, because they know that within 2, maximum 3 minutes, they are can be enjoying a burger. So you need to know not only what your product is, but also what's the add value you add to that product, whether it is the relationship you create with your customers over the process, or in this case, the convenience, or is the service, the customer service. Amazon is a great example of customer service. When you call to Amazon, you actually feel like you are talking to a person face to face, and you kind of feel a personal bond with the other person that you don't even know probably what his or her name is. So you need to know those kind of aspects when you start going into your marketing strategy. Because even though if you push your product, if you don't keep in mind the add value that you are offering to the market, then the marketing strategy is going to become a moot point. It's going to be repetitive. It's going to be like, yeah, we already sell burgers. We know McDonald's sells burgers, but so what? There are 1,000 companies out there that sell burgers. What makes you different from the other 999 companies that offer burgers?
That's actually a really, really good point.
Well, it raises the socioeconomic grouping that they're targeting as well. I'd love to see the figures for McCafe, for instance, which is supposed to be aimed at a much more, you know, upper AB socioeconomic grouping that doesn't rely on having 8 meals a week, you know, as a takeaway. So they aim heavily towards a socioeconomic grouping that they know will function on that food. They might not function for long, but they will function. I've got to stop beating up McDonald's. It's just that they're just such a prime example. And Pete, your example of Apple is another one. Apple have done a tremendous job creating a cult. I mean, I'm sitting here now, and I can actually literally pick up 5 phones that I've had in 2 years. They're all here. I've got Samsungs, I've got a Motorola, I've got all sorts. I've even got a couple of Chinese Xiaomi's here, which worked for about 6 weeks. But I buy a Motorola phone, right? That's a Lenovo, I believe it is these days. I paid $305 or something for it at a local Staples or Officeworks, as they're called here. And that phone's been functioning better than my Samsung 9 has functioned, you know, years before. Now, $305, $306. So what makes somebody go out and spend $1,800, $2,000 on an iPhone that is still only in beta? The reason I've got this is because it's 3 years into testing, and the upgrades and so on, and the firmware now actually work. It's not a beta product anymore. It's actually a good product that works. So the fact that people queue up in the streets and sleep overnight to go rushing in there and be treated badly by Apple staff is quite astounding. It's cultism at its best, and it's terrific. I mean, it works. It really does. And they will do that again next year at the next release as well. I mean, the success of their marketing is almost, I mean, it started with Steve Jobs and the way he did it. As you say, I think he said he's got 45,000 songs in his pocket, I think is how he launched the iPod. But look where he is now. Look where, well, we know where he is, but look where the company is, where it has established this fantastic cult of marketing where people want to buy a product that is frankly less than perfect in those first couple of iterations each year. And they'll camp out for it and they'll throw it away. And you know, they'll be back next year for the next one. So I can't argue with that kind of marketing. It's fantastic. So they know their product isn't telephones. That's their product isn't anything to do with telephones. That's not what they're selling. So what are they selling? I'm not going to answer it. People need to figure that out. What am I selling? You know, when my power drill snaps a drill bit and I've got to go in and buy one of those funny little twisty round things that go in the end of my drill, they're horrible. They snap, they break, they fly around the room and can have your eye out. When they're in the toolbox, you can't get them out because they're so small. I'm not there at the hardware shop to buy a drill bit. I need a hole. So I need to buy a hole is what I'm, you know, there for. So, you know, it's a really, really keen place to start. And that's, if you're not there and you can't provide a decent consumer benefit, then you're just throwing money against, you know, good money after bad. So
that's an interesting angle in terms of the discussion that we've had. So, you know, we started off talking about shouldn't we continue investing money in sales and marketing? What's become really apparent is really we need to first understand, well, what are we selling? What's the product or the service? And then what you said earlier, Chris, was look, don't stop in these times. This is when we really got to ramp up. And that's an interesting point. It's almost like what's happening with the stock market at the moment. I mean, it's being decimated. But if you're cashed up right now and if you're smart about it, this is probably the ideal time to start cherry picking and picking off those sort of stocks that have been completely decimated as a result of psychological fear and not a real fear or not a real cause behind the share going down. You know, it's not like the product is horrible or there was some sort of ethical problem, but it's more the psychology that's driven the sales of this, or lack of purchase of the shares.
That's right. So, I wish you hadn't raised that. Now I'm going to have to go and have a lie down.
I know where you're coming from.
If I might just come back to Carlos's point, which is really valid, and those 3 or 4 things all go together: the product, the spend, the planning, the understanding what the consumer benefit is, but most importantly, establishing that solid client relationship. And that's what Apple have done so tremendously, which has put them into that. And it's a position that we can hardly believe exists. I mean, as a marketing person, you know, we've had terrific successes over the years, but that is a ripper. I mean, that is just the best. People buy things they don't need, they don't want, they don't work sometimes, as I say, in the early iterations, and they go back and buy more of it. And that's magic. And that's all about relationships.
There is there is one other element to this discussion that I wanted to add in here, and this is where James and Farrah, I'll be asking you a question in a second. So we've spoken about investment and the right product, et cetera, but what we haven't actually mentioned is that when we're talking about sales and marketing, it's never ever as simple as just going like this and clicking a switch or flicking a switch and things just magically happen. Usually things happen iteratively. Usually there's a ramp up period when we're looking at sales and marketing activities. And that ramp up period could be a couple of days, could be weeks, could be months, depending on the activity. So this is the important thing. For anyone that's thinking about pausing sales and marketing campaigns, be really careful as to what you do. Because if we're talking about, let's say, search visibility, and you decide to stop or pause your search engine optimization activities, think about it. SEO often can take how many months, James and Farrah? How many months till you start seeing results?
3 months easily,
Yeah.
6 months to the most. And if you stop it, we've got people that are freaking out on we do marketing as well, and SEO clients. We tell them, hold on a second, don't do anything with your SEO, okay? Because that's like a train. It takes a while to get started and it takes a while to stop. But when you stop it, you're looking at 3 months easily for you to get ramped back up again. You're going to fall in the ranks. Your competitors are going to beat you because they know better, and you don't need that right now.
That's exactly right. And then that's the other point that I wanted to make, that sales and marketing isn't an instantaneous activity in many cases. Yes, there are some things, if you throw some money at Google AdWords, yes, it can work. But on the flip side, we still have that debate and that argument of, well, if your brand hasn't been seen by someone and they see you on Google, are they going to click on your ad? Do we need to have brand confidence before I start buying from you? If you're selling the same product as 6 other online stores, for example, and I haven't seen the brands before, chances are I'm going to shop around, window shop. How do I do that? Open new tabs and compare. But once I've experienced your brand, there's a high chance I'm going to come back and deal with you. So really important to bear in mind that when we're talking about stopping sales and marketing, the impact of that isn't just an immediate, oh, I'm just going to save a bit of money on sales and marketing because I can turn it off and it doesn't appear on my expense line. The question I've got for you is, well, okay, but how does that affect the future cash flow? What future revenue did you just impact? Because it could have a massive multiplying effect, pausing something as opposed to just holding onto it. Or maybe you might just need to wind it back a little bit. But things like SEO, email marketing, they can still continue and still be pushed aggressively. So
Yeah.
Any other feedback, comments, James and Farrah, around this?
So Peter, if you turn on the telly today, you'll notice that people are they're still showing ads. Besides all the notifications about, being safe during COVID-19, people haven't stopped advertising. And a lot of the products are not products that are just, home essentials or essentials to deal with your daily life. A lot of it is stuff that you wouldn't otherwise, be rushing out to buy. Amazon isn't delivering phones right now, but people are still advertising phones and what you're getting with it and things like that. They are being upfront about it. They are still targeting their audience. They still want to be visible. And if you take a step back in that, your competition's definitely going to be taking that step forward. They're going to beat you to that finish line. So the question is now a time that you want to sort of hibernate about that? Or do you really want to be out there so that people remember you? It's an investment that you make, and you may not see the return on investment now, but if you're consistently out there and letting your customers know that you're out there, especially during this time, you're still working on your next product, your next idea, they're going to want to see what's going on in your evolution. So definitely don't go into hiding right now.
Well, you've got an audience now, right?
Because it's a captive audience.
It's a captive audience.
Right.
More people are on TV, more people are on internet, more people are on their devices right now because they're not working. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, advertising is ramped up, marketing is ramped up. I mean, more people on YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, whatever is going on in your area, Vimeo. So I don't see it slowing down personally.
Yeah, and I mean, the options are endless as to how you can reach your target audience. And it's important to know what platforms they're on and how you should be going about it. So rather than stopping your sales and marketing, maybe now is the time to evaluate where you should be doing your marketing and how you should be doing your marketing, coming up with a strategy and a campaign.
Yeah. And what you say, Farrah, is interesting because you've probably got to cut a bit of slack into your ROIs. Not that I see a lot of Australian SMEs using, ROI tools, but, it's really important what you say because until someone says it out loud, you don't appreciate it. And what James just says is everybody's watching television now. I mean, I don't know how anybody watches commercial television in this country anyway, but lots of people do. So, there's a huge, probably the biggest audience we've seen for years and years and years. So if you know what your return on investment should be, you can probably cut yourself about 20% slack and say, okay, I've just got to keep my brand up front. It's got to stay up front because this will come back and return. And I think, Pete, the final point about sales and marketing is all about market share and really watching your ROI against your market share. I mentioned last week a client that I have who's got an 80% leap in business in the first week of self-isolation. And he's saying, I should have stayed home all the time. He runs a very, very big company and his business has leapt 80%. And I have to say, it's a badly managed business. I hope he's not listening, but it's a badly run business. And he's just saying, Chris, I'm doing great. What do I need you for? I'm 80% up. And I said to him, I'm sorry, but your product can't raise an additional market share of 80% or almost double sales in Australia. Your product's going offshore. Oh, I don't think so. No, I'm selling it. No, your product's going offshore. I know where your product's going to. And that means that when all this is over, if you're going to build your company to chase that particular market, then when this is all over, you're going to have difficulty returning back to your local market. So he feels he's picking up market share, but it's actually a false activity. So that's a product, it's a food product that's going overseas to feed someone overseas. It's not being actually consumed in Australia. So watching your market share is important. I mean, there'll be companies like Kimberley and Bowater Scott and Sorbent and companies like brands like that that'll currently be going, wow, look at this, we're 2,000% up on the same month last year. Sure, but it's fake. It's just false. It's not really there. It's smoke and mirrors. So it's really important to keep tabs on what's happening. And as you know, we were saying, just maintain the brand. If you can possibly do it, stay there, stay out there, because it will come back.
Good piece of advice. And Carlos, what would be the last thing you'd say to business owners out there, you know, who are looking at their expenses, looking at what's happening and asking, well, we've got to cut back somewhere. Is this the time to stop sales and marketing?
Well, my recommendation is the very first thing that you will need to look at. It's, as Chris was saying, the return on investment. They need to evaluate. It is essential for them to know what communication channels are generating revenue. Especially now with all the ROE tools that we have currently, it's pretty easy for business owners to determine how much revenue it's coming from the different strategies they have in place. Say at the moment, if you were to advertise your company in radio, yes, you are doing that, but we know that radio is probably one of the traditional mass media channels, one of the most expensive ones. And you don't know how many people are actually listening to your advertising. Whereas if you implement, say, a SEM or SEO strategy, you actually can have some metrics. Okay, how my brand is being exposed to X amount of audience. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing that it needs to be considered is that you create a communication consistency or brand consistency between all the channels that you advertise your company. Because if you don't create a brand consistency, rather than informing or creating brand exposure to your audience, what you're gonna do is gonna be confusing your possible targets. So you need to make sure that whatever communication you put in place is the same or pretty similar, or transmit the same idea across the different channels that you are promoting your company. And that's what I would say to these business owners.
Really, really powerful stuff. Just connecting the dots between what Carlos, you were just saying, and Chris was saying. So the important takeaway message for business owners in this, when looking at this particular question, is this: understand your product, understand your market, and if you've got the right product and you're targeting the right market, then now is not the time, if you can afford to cut back or to stop marketing. The second thing is that if you are continuing with marketing, which we're saying, look, you probably should, because it's an ideal time to be pushing forward for the various reasons we just discussed. If you're going to do it in a focused way. So do it in a way that, number one, you capture data. Number two, you review your data and you make changes based on what you're seeing, so facts. And the third thing is that if you're going to do it in a way that everything is synchronous and harmonious. So that if you've got 5-6 channels that you're using and you're communicating across 5-6 channels, there's harmony, and the things that the consumer experiences in terms of communication pieces all say the same thing across the channels. Going back to the McDonald's model that we've spoken about, one of the other reasons I believe people visit McDonald's is because it is consistent. It's a consistent product. You know what you're getting, you know how long it takes, you know what it's going to taste like, and you know the experience you're going to have when you walk into a McDonald's, regardless of where you are in Australia or in fact globally. So really powerful stuff for you. So I think we've covered that particular question really well. Now we have touched on when it comes to project management and certainly sales and marketing, we have touched on the digital side quite a number of times. And what's really has come to be apparent, certainly in my view, is that in 2020, being hit with the COVID is actually a positive thing if we have to be hit with the COVID, in the sense that if this happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and we didn't have digital tools and digital platforms, we would probably not be able to run businesses. If you go back to 1980, internet didn't exist how it exists. We didn't have the technology. We wouldn't be able to do these sort of digital communications, and certainly digital commerce did not exist. So riding through the COVID period and riding through these sort of future challenges, I think the digital is going to play more and more of a part of our daily lives. And in fact, look, we're all now tuned to this, and this has become a life for many individuals out there. The interesting thing about all of this is that there's actually a massive disconnect between what is available from a digital point of view, what we can do, and what organizations are actually doing. And the reason this disconnect exists, in my humble opinion, is because one, many people don't understand the technology. First of all, many people don't know the technology. Second, they don't understand the technology. And so therefore, when they don't know and they don't understand, they put up resistance to the technology. Now, the way you get around that as an organization is by developing and implementing a digital transformation strategy. Now, digital transformation, in my opinion, is the process of transforming and evolving an organization using digital technology, but doing so in a way that we bring the people with us along the journey. So the digital technology becomes a pure enabler, and it enables the people in our organization to work more effectively, do a better job, do different tasks, evolve and grow, and it enables our customers to use the technology that they're wanting to use. Because the consumers out there at the moment, we all know, everyone's wanting to be connected. Everyone's wanting to go digital. More and more people are shopping online, connecting with businesses online. So digital transformation can enable that within an organization. Now, what's interesting with digital transformation is that it's not a pure digital focused process. Digital transformation consists of every facet, actually considers every facet of the business. It considers the financial, the human resources, it considers the operations, and it considers the sales and marketing component. So I'm just going to throw this one out to Ken. Ken, digital transformation, when we're talking about undertaking these activities in the business, often means running digital projects. Is that sort of your take, or what have you experienced through the projects that you've been on? Oh, just unmute the microphone. Hang on, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, there are different interpretations of digital, and probably some people are thinking that that just having a social media account and such is enough for a digital strategy. So it really does impact all parts of the business. In terms of change management, a lot of what I'm seeing with some smaller businesses here in the Gold Coast, a lot of people are just struggling even with something like using Trello as a collaboration tool. And they would think that if they've got one of their young techies that is working with that, then that's enough of a digital transformation for them. So I think it really is a mindset in terms of understanding a lot of the opportunities that are out there throughout the whole business in terms of going from offline to online. And particularly, as you noted earlier, for regional and for small businesses, they're really at the starting gate there.
Definitely, definitely. What I love about what you said is that word mindset, because that's actually really powerful and so true. The digital transformation is about a mindset. It's a mindset around embracing change, being willing to evolve the way you do as an organization, because it's so easy for us as business owners to say, hey, we're doing great. Why should we change things? We've been doing the same things, the same way for the past 3-4 years. Why do I need to change things? It's working really well. Look, we're making money. So it's a new mindset, isn't it? It's that mindset of thinking from an evolutionary point of view and challenging the norm on a continuous basis.
And just on that, both Chris and I spent much time in Japan, and interestingly, that's a culture that has been very risk averse. And the question is to whether they're going to come to the table and embrace change and embrace the new technologies is still, in my opinion, still up in the air. So we Aussies here have the opportunity and have a bit more of a start in terms of the mindset for adapting to change. When you have companies like Atlassian and others, there are some really clever examples that other organizations can be made aware of. For example, even a company called Ivy that does event scheduling for Wembley Stadium, and it began down in Burleigh Heads here. So the mindset, I think, is very important, and by sharing some of those examples and helping for people to feel comfortable in change is key to the digital transformation fesuccess.
I think what's interesting about what we've spoken, and through this webinar, we touched on project management and marketing, and a few key sort of topics keep coming up. And one of them is this topic around change and the people involved. Now, Chris, you've seen a fair few things over the years in terms of how to change cultures within an organization from a performance point of view. And I guess it's not all about performance. It's also about how do you change a team and a culture when the technology, the underlying platform technology, when the underlying way that we're doing business is changing. What are your thoughts on that, Chris? I'd be interested to hear from a human point of view how the human side gets affected by the transformation project.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting because we were all told when all this started in the early 80s that we would all be working 3 days a week and having the other 4 off, and it was going to be terrific, and it just didn't happen that way. It meant that instead of working 8 or 10 hours a day and then heading home from the office and putting my feet up, it meant the office went with me 24 hours a day, and it really only gotten worse. So we've all got used to that. That's how we do our business. As you said right at the beginning, Pete, your office is in here and we live on our phones. And I think I can recall back in the mid-90s, I think I've mentioned to you before, Pete, I worked with a client who had a horse stud, very big polo stud up in top of the Hunter Valley. And the trainers were all young people, but they just, because they grew up on farms and they grew up in that environment, they refused to use computers. Now, the trainers in Sydney and Melbourne and the guys on course and the owners, they wanted the information delivered to them digitally. They wanted to know what was going on with that horse. But these people say, oh, I'm not using a computer. And they fell by the wayside, unfortunately, because they refused to adapt to the technology. So I don't think we're at that point anymore. I think we've got past that. And I think that one of the things you've talked about, Peter, is the way COVID might, in fact, accelerate digital for. And I think that's absolutely right. I think people are waking up to the fact that I've got to know, I've got to be involved. But I still come back to that big jigsaw of the nature of people and the people who are delivering the change in these organisations, how they need to understand the psyche of their teams. And it's a really critical issue, knowing, as I say, whether you're a left brain or a right brain, how you're going to receive and accept this technology and who you're going to let tell you that you have to accept this technology. So that's all about a critical point of change management, on the human side, which is really important. But look, I don't think it's going to be a big problem, and I think unfortunately that that's as a result of COVID. I think people are going to be pushed over the edge and go, well, I either do this or I get left behind.
I think so.
And I think that realization is there. But can I just come back to something Ken said a moment ago? It's a little off topic, but it interested me because it happened to me this morning. I drive a European car, and I interact with both the franchise dealership and a little local German auto mechanic that has 4 mechanics working at it. A little backstreet joint. Now, this morning I received a text and an online follow-up email from the little German shop. I'll give you their name. It's Auto House, saying, we will look after your vehicle. We will come and pick it up. We'll do the job because they know my vehicle's due for service. We'll bring it back all clean, polished, disinfected. And as we do our process, you can have a look at the diagnostics live as we go through the process. That's great service. Now, that's the very first early step of a mechanic shop looking at what can I do digitally, to enhance my business. I've heard nothing from the major franchise, which is Mercedes-Benz. Nothing. I mean, I don't know whether they're doing it, but if they have, they've forgotten me. So a little tiny backstreet business with 4 or 5 employees. His wife is his accountant. He's got me already. I need my car serviced. It'll go to him. He'll pick it up. He'll take it away. He'll bring it back cleaned and disinfected and swabbed. And at any time, he's going to put me online to look at the diagnostics as they run the diagnostics. Now, simple little first step. And he's found out what technology requirements are and done it. And, it's terrific. I think that is really good. And that's an example of a first step. And the other thing that Ken mentioned was the adoption, or it might have been you, Peter, the adoption of marketing in this area and it's possibly our fault as consultants. Sometimes when we want to get a client on board with marketing and with social media and so on and so forth, as a first step, we point them into the successes that we always have with LinkedIn. Get onto LinkedIn, do this, do that. Quite often they see quite a huge lift in their business just because they're finally networking. And they go, well, that'll do me. I don't need anything else. So that may be our fault. So I think we've got to try and look for life beyond, when it comes to marketing and social networking, we've got to look for life beyond LinkedIn as well. So, it's a terrific tool and it's working really well now, but as a first step, that's what it is. It's a first step only.
That's exactly right. I think what's important to bear in mind is that every single organization, doesn't matter what you do, what sort of business you're in, not for profit as well, there are 4 key fundamental pillars that we have to talk about. We've got the sales and marketing, we've got the finance, we have human resources, and we have operations. When we're talking about digital transformation, true digital transformation addresses all of those components holistically. Now, it doesn't mean that you go forward with the transformation project that does all of it all at the same time, because chances are it'll just explode because you're doing way too many things. But what it means is you have a strategy that encompasses all of it. And then out of that, we decide, okay, what's that short-term, quick impact project that we can roll out that will give us an immediate impact? And then we use the immediate impact to get buy-in from our customers and get buy-in from our staff into the change process itself. And then we start introducing, or maybe at the same time, we start introducing more and more complexities and bigger projects, bigger transformations. So the message in that is that transformation should be continuous, should be evolutionary. I'm always cautious when a client says to me, I want to do this massive thing. You go, well, hang on a second, you haven't got the tiny little thing over here sorted. So let's not try and run too fast before we start walking. I love that story about that little mechanic that you're talking about, and that's a prime example that it's the mindset, because the owner there has got the right mindset, and they've got the mindset of that you know what, they've got to differentiate. And if we go back to our discussion around sales and marketing, now there's a prime example of investing in a piece of technology that enables for differentiation. You know your product, your customer's going to buy into it because you're providing something that is really relevant. And more importantly, Chris just told us and however many other people are listening to this and watching this about this business. So all of a sudden you've got the virality effect of something that is unique and being done in a really, really clever way. So James and Farrah, you guys have got some really interesting experience around technology. And we, James, often I ask you some really silly questions and, you're so patient with me with your answers, but underpinning a lot of digital transformation is the technology itself. I'm a small business owner and I don't know anything about technology, right? What do I do? How do I step into this technology realm that seems so scary for me? What would you advise?
I think the first thing would be to find a digital transformation associate or consultant.
Hey, happy days.
And just have a conversation.
.com.au.
Anyway, but yeah, I think talking to somebody who knows something about technology could get you in the right direction. I think having the initial mindset, which going back to mindset, being open-minded about change, about the future, about I say technology, but keeping your options open, right? So one of the things that I do on a regular basis, I think I've done it for years, is just window shopping. Like I want to know what's in the store because in case I need it. As a technician, I used to build, computers and servers and all these other things. So I would just go walking through the stores and I would end up knowing more than the guys working there of what's there and how much it is and where to find it. I ended up helping customers. But, they thought I worked there, but no. I think that just knowing what's out there is a key benefit there, right? So like now if somebody says, hey, what's the cost of this and where can I find it? I can give you 3 different stores and different prices. Now we have the internet for that. That's fine. The technology is not that difficult. I think that the people's ability to be open-minded about it. I think that they're like, oh, well, I don't know that tech stuff. So I'm just, they're closed instantly.
It's
right?
very overwhelming for them.
It is. And you talk to people like, 60, 70 years old and they're just beginning because they're retired or their job didn't put them into a position using or touching technology. And so I've had to help those people from a support perspective, tech support. And they're like, this damn thing, or that mindset where it's like, it's broken. It's like, hold on. Maybe we're just not approaching it the right way. We're asking the right questions. So I think there's some really, really cool, I think the mindset would need to change from, if I'm talking to a person that's running a small business and you're hearing about technology and you're hearing that it could possibly, benefit your business. I think mindset's the first thing to change. Don't be closed, ask more questions about it. How can it help my business? What's the first place to start? If I don't want to go all in because I can't afford it or I don't understand it, what's the first thing that I need? And I think it's the mindset. I think you just need to be open. You need to research more, take some spare time. Like I said, contact a consultant. Hopefully you can get somebody on the phone that'll give you their time for about an hour and give you the alternatives, the options. Go and research it yourself. I think that's a big deal too, is the mindset to research things yourself really changes everything versus I don't know, I'm not going to spend my time, I'm not going to bother. So that mindset has to change for you to be open enough in order to walk forward.
How interesting. We've sort of, we're talking about digital transformation and we're all really ended up talking about in here. We're all talking about mindset.
That's the origin of everything.
And this is sort of what I was hoping that we would get out of this discussion, because I really wanted the audience to understand that digital transformation is not just not as simple as the hardware that you're selecting. It's not as simple as, setting up some email marketing campaigns and social media and things like that. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being in an organization. And more importantly, it's just a tool. It's another tool. Digital transformation is just another tool to evolve and to grow as a business. I mean, Ken and Chris, you guys having spent so much time in Japan, we're probably all aware of where lean manufacturing came from, for example, you know, and how lean started. And then that sort of progressively grew, and you've got the likes of Six Sigma and all these different practices that have come out of there. And it almost feels like, to an extent, there's this fadism going on, where the fad is lean, then it's Six Sigma, and it might be digital transformation. But really, at the heart of it, all we're talking about is just the mindset approach towards business, which is really all about accepting change and evolving and enabling. So it's yeah, some pretty powerful stuff. Now, Carlos is an interesting one on the team, and I'm going to sort of point at you, Carlos, because you know, you're the younger generation sort of coming through. You're the younger generation of consultants that's coming through, and you know, between you and I, we've got 16 years. You're 24, Carlos?
25.
25. So we've got 15 years between the two of us. But what's interesting is that I, you know, having born in 1980. Didn't grow up with technology. Now, Chris and Ken, you didn't grow up with the technology either. And, you know, and same with, you know, James and Farrah, we sort of got exposed to that technology as we were becoming more mature as individuals, as we got into teens, 20s.
Not me.
Maybe not him.
Yeah, I had it since 1984, so I was about 4 or 5 years old when I had my first computer. So I definitely was that other generation.
Yeah, not me.
There you go. So, I mean, look, you know, we've got the likes of James who, you know, and by the way, that actually is a massive kudos to you, because that means, you know, the talent we've got on the team is extraordinary in terms of the knowledge from that point of view. But I guess the point that I was trying to make is that Carlos grew up with this because, you know, was it 1995 you were born? Is that
94.
Right? 94. There you go. 94 was when he was born. So, you know, when Carlos was 5 years old, I was building my first company. And that's really exciting, because we've now got someone on the team who this is all he knows, right? He knows this stuff because this is what he grew up with. When 2007, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, Carlos was 13 years old, and that's what he knows and understands. And this is really important to understand from an employer point of view. Because what's happening is that the 40-year-olds are starting to go into senior management. We're starting to become the general managers. We're starting to step up into the CEO level within organizations. And certainly if it's a family business, many 40-year-olds are now starting to take over the entire running of these organizations. Now, what's thus happening is that the 20-year-old, the 25-year-old is starting to come up the ranks as well. And they're bringing their knowledge of technology into the business. However, what we're finding is that there's starting to become a disconnect between the Carloses of the world and between the managers. And the disconnect is because Carlos is coming in with technology in mind, consuming technology, consuming and understanding this stuff. And on the other hand, you might have the manager who didn't grow up with it and hasn't got the connection as solid. And as a result, there's a disconnect between the two parties. And you start having problems because Carlos is consuming information in one way and the manager in the other way. There's a miscommunication and a misinterpretation. So the reason I say this is because one of the other key things, the key roles that digital transformation plays in an organization is that it helps bridge the age gap. It helps bridge the divisional gap between the younger generation and the older generation coming in. And that's an important thing for people to understand, because more and more young people have got jobs, more and more young people have disposable incomes to spend on things. Consumerism as a general rule has been driven by young people. Now, we do have the older population retiring and using some of their superannuation money as well. But young people are the drivers. So we've got to make sure from a business point of view that when we consider transformation, it's not just for the purpose of efficiency, but it's also to close the gap between the ages, to bring not just the ages between the staff together, but for your business to be better at engaging with the younger generation consumer. Because if the young generation consumer looks at your business and thinks, oh, fuddy-duddy, they will not deal with you, even if you've got great customer service. So really, transformation is pretty powerful at all levels. Carlos, is there anything you wanted to add on that, seeing as that I've just sort of picked on you and Put you under the bus.
I would like to add something, and everything relates to the same topic we were just discussing. Technology, it's in a process of evolving constantly. Technology is ever changing, you know, it's always transforming, it's always evolving. And I can tell you that even though you just mentioned, I am the new tech geek within the company because I'm young. I can tell you, technology is changing that fast that now that generational gap that is between now and, say, for example, my younger cousins, which are currently 11, 10 years old, is considerable big, because now they're seeing things that I didn't grow up with. So new technologies, new social media, new gadgets that they know how to use perfectly, just because of the same way I learned, just by engaging with it. That now, because I am in the workforce, I'm doing things differently. I am in that, say, transitioning process between the previous generation and the upcoming technologies. I haven't had the chance to interact with. So everything definitely, and I agree with you all guys, everything comes to being open, having an open mindset, and embracing these new facilities that, new, how can I say, new tools that the technology provides new businesses owner. So it's just everything about embracing and kind of find that point in between, a point that you feel comfortable doing business, but also being open to changing. It's because technology, it's a fact. It's always gonna be changing, and it's gonna be changing for, I don't know how many years. Probably it's not gonna stop. So,
yeah. I mean, Carlos brings up a really good point. We're seeing these gaps happen even within the generations, right? Things are changing so fast. Carlos is in the workforce, so he's using the tools that a company uses, may not be aware of what's going on, because his day-to-day is what the company uses and the tools he's leveraging. What tends to happen is businesses may stagnate. We're not saying keep changing your technology to keep up with the next new thing that comes out, but definitely reevaluate what's available to your business, because you could have efficiency gains. There's like this thought process of, if it's not broken, why fix it? Well, this is when you find out, when a disaster like this happens, your system isn't perfect. And if you're still walking out with pieces of paper, as Peter, you and I have seen with a particular client, they're still walking pieces of paper back and forth between people. I mean, you're so many steps behind what you should be doing. There are efficiency gains, and especially at a time like this where people are working remotely, you've got to reevaluate your systems. It may not be the latest and greatest, but it could be something that gives your company a serious efficiency boost.
Exactly. If I could add to that point that Farrah just touched, just by bringing up a personal experience that I got from the previous job that I got. When I took over the position, this company, they operate like so old-fashioned way. So they got piles and piles of papers and documents. And if I was to find, a single file for client Y or client, I don't know, whatever you want to name it, I would have to go through this amount of paperwork that you can't imagine. It was crazy, it was ridiculous. But just at the beginning, I noticed my supervisor was a little bit reluctant to implement a new software or technology that could provide me with the tools or make my work more efficient, so I could just type in the person's name and then all the information related to that human being will pop up. It took a little bit of time for me to knowing where he was coming from, but also in showing the benefits of using such platforms. So I think it's a little bit of having an in-between point between the old-fashioned way in which business used to operate in the past, and also for the new generation, that's the task for the new or the future business owners or future managers, to understand that changing it's not easy. It's not easy for anyone. And then it's just a matter of a process. You need to build up the relation, and you need to make the person, the manager, see the benefits on using the different digital transformation tools out there.
If I could just leap in on this one, because I'm a perfect example of the generation gap, if you like. I'm fortunate. I back in the about early mid 80s, I was a partner in a very large advertising agency, Australia wide, and we made a decision to adopt computer generated graphics. We were going to move over from the old Chiron and all this sort of stuff, and print galleys and things to lay out ads, and we were going to do it all on computers. Of course, there was no software that really existed. Everything was fairly basic. So we ended up, I think we did a deal with either NCR or Philips via NCR, and we put 20 computers in our green room, and we let the staff go in there of a night or during the lunch hour and play with these computers to become familiar. My partner, who was a copywriter, I came in one morning and discovered in the waste bin a big pile of Polaroid shots, because he'd been writing copy on this, just on a basic word processing, software on the computer. And he wasn't quite sure whether, as he changed the page, whether he was doing it correctly or whether he was going to lose it. So as he finished a page of copy, he'd take a photo of it with a Polaroid camera. Now, he never got past that, ever, really. And the reason was, we then came, a bit later on, we came to have we solved that by putting a computer expert in a bank of people who were designers. We had 6 people down each side of a table, and we had a guy who knew his way around computers and software programs, and someone would say, I'm stuck, how do I draw that line, or how do I make a circle? And he told them how to do it. And now we have a generation of kids that, thrive. They've managed to marry creative, with the technology, which is fabulous. But I recall, and I'm going around this a long way, but I recall I had a client very early in the piece, which was BBC Computers. They were one of the first of the home, sort of small home computers. You won't remember them, Carlos. They were probably come and gone, but they almost morphed into Apple computers. They were very similar little things. And they started a group of shops called the Logic Shops, and they filled them all up with computer experts and said, righto, let's get these things sold. Let's get them out into the mass consumer market. And this is the mid 80s, I think. And 2 things. James made a point about he goes into shops and he can help a customer better than often the staff can. And Farrah said, this is about communication. They said to us, we can't believe this. We can't sell these things. What's going on? They're cheap. They're terrific. You can do all sorts of things with them, but we can't sell them. So we got called in. I went in and we sat in the store for about 3 days, and we really didn't need to be there 3 days. We probably only needed 3 hours. And what was happening in all of their stores, well, they had a bunch of guys with propellers on their heads talking down to the customers. The customers were flummoxed. They had no idea of the language being used. The communication was all downhill, and it was atrocious. So our recommendation was get rid of those guys. I'm sorry, put them in the back somewhere or something, but go down to Myers, which James and Farrah is your JC Penney, I guess, in the States. Big department store. Go down to Myers and hire all the guys out of the shirt shop. Teach them what they need to know to sell these things, but on a human level. Don't use that language. Use the consumer benefits language. So that was a big turning point. And when I try to explain to digital, people that are trying to get their companies to adopt digital, I often sit mentoring and I'll have a client say to me, one of my mentees will say, I just can't get anyone to listen to me. These guys are so old. And I said, well, how are you speaking to them? How are you talking to them? Communication is really, really, really critical. And as I say, I was fortunate that I was thrust into it way back at the beginning. And I was able to breed a couple of my own early adopters. So when I needed to know anything, I'd get my kids to teach me. So, that worked for me. But they're now older than Carlos. So you know, I'm out of advisors at the moment because they're now saying, I don't know anything about that, you know, so.
Hey, Chris, I've got 2 6-year-olds and a 7-year-old that are now, you know, YouTube savvy. My daughter's got a YouTube channel. We've got a few videos up there. I showed them, I've taught them how to sell things on eBay just because, well, I just think, yeah, if you know commerce, then you're going to be right in the world from a job point of view. So if you need someone, let me know. We'll
but it's true.
play Minecraft.
Exactly
Have
what Carlos
consultants
said.
available.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. I mean, so it's, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and look, it's been important to have this discussion. I think it's really timely. Everything that we spoke about today, you know, starting off from the challenges of project management and projects changing, discussing, well, shouldn't you invest into sales and marketing, and then finally we've just talked about this mystical digital transformation, which in fact, from what I'm hearing, it turns out to be a mindset, and it's just an approach and a way of using technology to enable for business to evolve and grow, which, you know, sort of makes it clearer, makes it a lot more easy for people to understand. So with that, probably want to wrap up by saying that if you're watching this video, listening to this on a podcast, or even just listening to this on the video, and if you're watching a short version, then please find the other videos, the other podcasts, so that you can connect the dots and watch the full thing. If you're watching the full thing, you managed to watch the full thing, and I'm looking at the timer, it's about 1 hour and 45 minutes and 40 seconds. Job well done. Hopefully you haven't fallen asleep. Just kidding, but thank you very much for taking part in this team. Really appreciate this. And look, to all the business owners out there, if you've got any questions, comments, feedback, anything you want to discuss around anything we've talked about, as you can see, we're a really friendly bunch of people. We're laid back. We want to help business owners succeed. Don't hesitate to reach out. We work collaboratively as a team, and you know, we're here to solve problems and help you, importantly, create the future. Now, just before we log off, I'm just going to pass the microphone around. Anything else anyone wants to add to the discussion before we finish up this first webinar?
I'll just say that, as you just noted, that it does come down to open mindset. And so even as we were talking about project management, there are alternatives there, and some really ones that result in more motivated teams and getting the best out of the team members. So obviously you probably heard some of my bias about Agile Scrum, but I encourage anybody to look at that as a way of really getting the best out of people.
Fantastic. Look, if there's no other comments, then Chris, is there something you want to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Peter, for getting this happening, because apart from anything else, whilst we might be busy with a bit of pro bono work with our clients, I'm the same. I'm always available to take, you know, questions or to help people out. You know, at the moment, it's, for me, these meetings that we have are great. They keep me in the world, they keep me attached to my peers, and they keep me in the industry, and they keep me active. So, you know, well done, Pete.
Fantastic.
Well done, Pete. Yeah.
Thank you for the feedback, team. And yeah, look forward to the next webinar. We'll announce it to the world when we sort of got the dates sorted. And in the meantime, any comments, feedback, let us know. And if you're watching this on one of the normal social media channels, follow us, like us, share it, tell the world about what we're doing, spread the message, and all the best for the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.